Every sermon is an expanded translation. Today we receive the book of Ruth from our Jewish siblings with our respect and affection. Ruth is read in synagogue for Shavuot, which is the Thanksgiving Harvest Festival that we also know by the name Pentecost. Ruth of Moab, or the salvation of Naomi, or Boaz finds his voice, or who is my neighbor? There was a time in Israel when there was no king, and there wasn't much respect for institutions of government. People pretty much did and thought what they felt like doing and thinking. Well, a great famine came over the land of Israel, and in a famine, everyday life, normal life, pretty much shuts down. And a certain man from here in Bethlehem became desperate about feeding his family. Bethlehem means the house of bread. And that bread emptied out, and so did this man's house. He sold his home, sold his land in a 50-year lease, went into debt. None of it was enough. So the family walked 100 miles through the desert, round the Dead Sea, to Moab. To pile up the ironies, this man's name was Elimelech. My God is king. Now, people in Israel did not necessarily get along with people from Moab. Their men rip us off, and their women are seductresses. In fact, our word Moab means my child by my father. In fact, our law singled out Moabites. Take Deuteronomy 23, for example. Thou shalt not ever promote the well-being or prosperity of a Moabite as long as thou shalt live. No descendant of a Moabite could ever be admitted to the assembly of the Lord, no matter how many generations had gone by. And yet, Elimelech's family somehow found welcome in Moab. Elimelech, his wife, Naomi, in your tongue, pleasant, and their sons, whose names were Mahlon and Chilion, they mean, I kid you not, frail and wasting away. These were hard times. And there in Moab, Naomi became a widow. Her sons married Moabite women, one named Orpah, and the other named Ruth, my compassionate friend. Well, after a decade, both frail and wasting away also died, and the widows had to fend for themselves. Famine ended, they set out for Bethlehem, but soon Naomi had a change of heart. Orpah, Ruth, look, you've been so kind and faithful to me and to our dead. May the Lord show you such covenant faithfulness, but in the home of a new husband. You know what it's like to be a woman on your own around here. Go back to your mother's homes. Go with my blessing. And she kissed them goodbye, and they all wept out loud like mourners at a funeral. They said, no, we want to return with you to your people. But Naomi replied, turn back, girls. Why would you want to return with me? At my age, am I ever going to have children to become your husbands? Even if that wasn't impossible, if I could get married tonight and conceive tomorrow morning, could you somehow have a family with those boys? No, my dear daughters, you must not walk on with me. You can still go back to something in Moab. I know what it is to be a widow in a foreign land, and the hand of the Lord has become hostile to me. Then they all wailed out loud again. At last, Orpah kissed her mother-in-law farewell and turned to go. Now, Orpah was not required to stay with Naomi by law or custom, but people have been hard on her for this decision. Some of our Bible teachers say she went back, became promiscuous, had 4 sons who grew up to be giants, and one of them was Goliath, who tried to destroy us. They say Orpah had to be assassinated by one of King David's generals. Now, all that never seemed likely to me, being how there are 4 generations between Orpah and David. But it does tell you something about the hostility toward Moabite women. Now, as Orpah turned away, Ruth threw herself on Naomi and clung to her. And Naomi said, "Look, honey, your sister-in-law is going back to her people and her God. It's time, Ruth." But Ruth said, "Stop it, Mama. You are my people. Your God is my God. I would never abandon you. As the Lord lives, wherever you go, I will go. And when they've lain you down in the dust, eventually they'll bring me to lie down next to you." And when Naomi saw that Ruth had made up her mind, she was speechless. So the two of them walked on till they came to Bethlehem. Now, when they arrived, the place was abuzz. The women said, "That can't be Naomi. Pleasant?" And she said to them, "Fine, don't call me pleasant. Call me bitter. The Almighty's dealt bitterly with me. I left here full, and the Lord has brought me back empty." Now, it happened to be the first harvest in March, and it also happened that Naomi had a relative there in Bethlehem on Elimelech's side, well-known, well-off man named Boaz. And Ruth asked Naomi, "Could I go out to glean in the fields behind the harvesters? Surely someone will give me permission." And Naomi gave Ruth her blessing again. And as luck would have it, Ruth happened to fall in behind the reapers in the field of Boaz. Late that morning, Boaz arrived from Bethlehem. He called out to the harvesters, "The Lord be with you." And they called back. And then Boaz took his foreman aside. "I see there's a new gleaner. We got another family in hard times here." And the foreman said, "Oh, that's Naomi's daughter-in-law. She asked permission. She's been here on her feet since early this morning with just one short break. She's from Moab, you know." Well, you know the text about Moab. "Thou shalt not promote their well-being." Then there are all the texts about kindness to widows and gleaning for resident aliens and equal legal treatment. So you can be loving or biblical. Is that it? You know, my mom, did you ever get to meet my mom? My mom was from down there by Moab, foreigner. Rahab, of course. She got trafficked. Happens a lot down toward the bottom of the pyramid. Well, look, you be sure that Ruth knows we all eat lunch together and we provide the food. And then Boaz walked over to Ruth and said, "Now this is important, friend. You should glean here for the rest of the year. Do not go glean in another field. Stay close to the other young women you're gleaning with. Keep your eyes on the field that's being reaped. Follow along. Young men here know that we respect our gleaners. And when you get thirsty, just go over to these filled pots and drink what the harvesters have put there for us all." Well, Ruth was overwhelmed. She said, "Why should you be so kind to me when I'm a foreigner from Moab?" But Boaz answered, "Well, at a town this size, people pretty much know your business about the same time you do, Ruth. I've heard in detail of all that you've done for your mother-in-law since your husband died, how you left your parents, your native land, come to this strange place without knowing what you were getting into. May your kindness have a full reward from the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you've come for refuge." And then she said, "You are really being kind to me, sir. And you've spoken reassurance to my core, even though I am one of the least of these." Mealtime, Boaz said to her, "Come on over, eat some of this bread. Dip it in the oil and wine vinegar." And she sat down with the workers. Boaz served her a big heap of parched grain. She ate till she was full, and she saved the rest. And when she walked away to glean, Boaz went to the harvesters. Now, Ruth is new here, so if she gleans from the gathered sheaves instead of from what you've missed, Don't embarrass her. In fact, when you finish a sheaf, just take out a handful or two and throw it on the ground for her, and when she's not looking, don't give her a hard time. So she gleaned till evening, and she beat the hulls off, and it came to about 30 pounds, more than a paid reaper. She put it in her shawl and carried it into town, and her mother-in-law stood gaping at how much she brought home. And then Ruth brought out her lunch leftovers. Naomi asked, "Where did you glean today? Blessed be the man who's befriended us. The man with whom I work today is named Boaz." And then Naomi said, "Blessed be he by the Lord, who has not failed in his kindness to the living or the dead." Say, that man is a relative of ours. He's a close relative. He's a redeeming kinsman. And then Ruth the Moabite said, "He even said to me, 'Stay near my workers for all my harvests.' Naomi answered, 'It is best to stay with his young women. You might be mistreated in a different field.' So she worked closely with the young women of Boaz's fields, gleaning till the barley and wheat harvest had ended, while she lived with her mother-in-law. Now, as the harvest was winding down, Naomi said to Ruth, 'Sweetie, I don't want you to have to glean the rest of your life. I'll be fine. Look, tonight your kinsman redeemer Boaz will be winnowing barley off-site at the threshing floor, and then he'll be sleeping with the grain to protect it. I mean, in this town, when else will you get a moment to talk confidentially? So wash up, change into your Sabbath clothes, slip down to the threshing floor. When he's eaten and he goes to lie down, watch where he goes. And when he's asleep, go and uncover his feet and lie down nearby. When his cold feet wake him up, he'll understand what you're doing. He won't judge you.' Ruth said to her, 'Okay, I'll do just what you said.' So she went down to the threshing floor. Boaz nestled in at the far end of the grain pile, and a while later Ruth crept over, uncovered his feet, lay down. At midnight, something startled Boaz, and he turned over, and there lying at his feet, he saw a woman. He said, 'Who are you?' And she answered, 'It's just Ruth, your co-worker.' 'Boaz, it's time we talked.' The Almighty wraps himself with light as with a garment. He covers the deep with his love, and we take refuge beneath his wings. Boaz, you're a kinsman redeemer. Spread your wings over me.'" It's a metaphor, Boaz. We belong together. Redeem Naomi's farm and marry me, Bo. Despite the hour, Boaz's eyes welled up. "Oh, bless you, dear Ruth. Your compassion is even greater than I'd realized. Everyone admires you. You could marry anybody. I can't believe you would choose me. And you're still watching out for Naomi. Time with you is depth beneath depth of kindness. Yes, Ruth, 70 times 7 yeses. Have no fear. I want to do everything you've said." Now, there is one complication. I am indeed a near kinsman, but you know how this Jubilee system works, and someone is in the line of succession ahead of me. In the morning, he has to be given a chance to redeem. If he turns this down, "As the Lord lives, I will redeem your family." Boaz had never felt so much like a Boaz. Love makes us more of what we truly are, not less. And Boaz's natural creative capacity for action began to catch up with Ruth's. "Stay here where you'll be safe the rest of the night." So she lay there and slept. Boaz had some difficulty getting back to sleep. And Ruth awoke as usual before sunrise. Boaz had realized they should modify the plan. "You know how people talk. You should get back to Naomi before the town wakes up. Now, hold out that Sabbath cloak of yours. Hold on tight." And he measured out 60 pounds of barley. He helped her put it on her shoulders, which tells you something about Boaz's generosity and also about Ruth's strength. she carried it in the dark to her mother-in-law. And Naomi said, "So, who are you now, dear?" And then Ruth told Naomi all that had happened. "He gave me this mountain of barley. Don't go back to Pleasant without some pleasantries." Well, just you wait, dear. That man will not rest until he sorts this out today. And in the meantime, Boaz had gone into town. Now, legal matters were arranged at the town gate as people came in and out to their fields. And no sooner had Boaz gotten to the gate when, lo and behold, that next of kin, whose name I can't remember just now, came passing by. And Boaz said, "Come sit down here, mister." And he went and sat down. And then Boaz corralled 10 of the elders. "You sit over there." So they sat down. And turning to the next of kin, he began, "Naomi, our relative, has returned from Moab, and the land that Naomi and Elimelech leased out is available for redemption. I thought I should bring this to your attention. Friend, redeem it in the presence of those here if you wish, but if not, tell me here and now. No one comes prior to you, and I'm next in line." And the relative said, "Sure, I could use a second farm to go with the inheritance I'll get eventually. I'll redeem it." Then Boaz said, "Now you realize this is a Jubilee kinsman-redeemer situation, right? A redeemer acts to recover what's been lost. So when you pay the debt on the land of Naomi and Ruth, the spirit of the law expects you to also take responsibility to support Naomi, marry Ruth, the Moabite, the widow of the dead man, to have children as descendants in their name. The land was their family's for all time. And that family name is not to die out in Israel." And at this, the next of kin said, "Boaz, seriously? I can't do that. My own daddy would cut me off if I did that. Boaz, your descendants by her won't have your name. Don't write yourself out of history." Well, Boaz, still standing, turned away to the elders and the other people who'd gathered. "Today you are all witnesses that I am paying for all that belonged to Naomi and Elimelech and Chilion and Mahon. I've also become betrothed to Ruth, the Moabite, the wife of Mahlon, to be my wife. And our children will maintain the dead man's name among us and inherit all of our property. Today you're witnesses." And the people spontaneously blessed Boaz and Ruth. "We are witnesses. May the Lord make Ruth like Rachel and Leah, who filled up the house of Israel. May your family be like that of Perez, your ancestor, whom Tamar bore to Judah." So Ruth became Boaz's wife. When their first son was born, the women of the town went to see Naomi. "Blessed be the Lord, who today has given you a redeemer. May his name be renowned in Israel. He will fill up your life and sustain your old age. For your daughter-in-law who loves you, who is more to you than 7 sons, has borne him." And then Naomi received the child and couldn't stop hugging him and became his caregiver. The women of the neighborhood gave him a name, joking that a son has been born to Naomi, and they named him Obed, the caregiver. Now, it's not as if the story needs a punchline, but Obed eventually became the father of Jesse. Jesse became the father of King David. So much for writing yourself out of history. You'll remember that God himself chose this descendant of a Moabite to be king of all Israel. He was an imperfect king, but God promised that a greater king, the greatest possible king, would eventually hold David's throne forever. Now, David was the ancestor of Joseph, and Joseph and Mary became the parents of Jesus. And we have come to know Jesus as that ultimate king, the great prophet who leads us into life in his kingdom, our own closest relative and kinsman redeemer, friend of every outcast. Whatever unpayable debt of ours would seem to keep us from a full, free life with God, in Jesus, God has removed that debt. And wherever a person is pushed to the margins of life, Jesus calls us my body in the world, through which Jesus still acts. We never need to look far for places to be kind. We have Christ in our neighbor.